with Scott Allen.
Hello, I am your host, Scott Allen, and this is Phronesis, Practical Wisdom for Leaders. If the topic is leadership, I'm in. I've spent more than 20 years in the field teaching, learning, writing, and questioning. When I'm not working on Phronesis, I travel, delivering keynotes, working with individuals and teams, and helping people from organizations across industries become better leaders. Want to learn more? Visit me at scottjallen.net. Phronesis offers a smart, fast-paced discussion about all things leadership. We explore relevant topics and incorporate practical tips to help you make a difference in how you lead and live. Listen Notes lists Phronesis in the top 3% of podcasts worldwide. Phronesis is the official podcast of the International Leadership Association. ILA brings together those who teach, study, and develop leadership, advancing leadership knowledge and practice for a better world. Learn more at ila-net.org. Finally, if you enjoy Phronesis, please subscribe to stay current on our weekly episodes. If you find an episode that resonates, please share it with your colleagues and friends. And if you want more content, subscribe to my newsletter, The Leader's Edge. The link is in the show notes. As always, thanks for listening. And now, here's today's show. Okay, everybody, welcome to Phronesis, another episode. And this one's a little exploratory. I'm excited. I'm really excited for this conversation with Al-Dhubaib, a globally recognized data scientist, entrepreneur, and innovator in trusted artificial intelligence. Al-Dhubaib is the founder, CEO, and AI strategist of Pandata, a Cleveland-based AI design and development firm that helps companies like Parker Hannifin, the Cleveland Museum of Art, First Energy, Penn State University, solve their most complex business challenges with trustworthy AI solutions. Cal's commitment to diversity and ethics is centered at the heart of his work. Years of experience as a data scientist and AI strategist have given Cal deep expertise in how business leaders can use AI to drive growth and improve outcomes. He's a technical expert on topics like applying machine learnings to develop new AI capabilities, ethical challenges around AI like bias and explainability, and how AI is used and should be used by top companies. Cal is especially passionate about inclusive workforce development, where he advocates for careers and educational pathways in data science. He's been to many countries in the world. I believe it's around 18, and he has a goal getting to 50 by 50. This is a noble goal, sir. I'm so excited to have you. What else, Cal, do listeners need to know about you?
As of this past Wednesday, that number has reached 22.
You know what? My family, our goal has been to get to 50 states by the time I'm 50. And we're at 48. We have Alaska.
Amazing.
Yes. We have Alaska this summer. We have Hawaii this December because COVID got us behind schedule a little bit. So the rule is you have to have a meal or spend a night. There are a couple where we've just kind of had a meal.
I'll count it. As long as the meal isn't in an airport, it's allowed.
I agree. They haven't been in airports. You know, I'm trying to think of a good example of where it just has been a meal. Kansas, I'm going to count this because Kansas has a turnpike. That's unfair that Kansas has a turnpike. So we ate once we got off the turnpike. But Cal, that's not our topic today. The topic is you, sir. Thank you so much for being here. What do listeners need to know about you?
That's a great question. Well, we were talking a little bit about artificial intelligence today, and I always like to start with definitions. Given all the hype, I find that this is an especially problematic definition. In fact, if you ask 10 different data scientists, you'll get 10 different answers. So what do we do on a regular basis? Artificial intelligence is nothing more than software that does two things really well: recognizes complex patterns. So that can be in images, audio, conversations, boring old spreadsheets. That's one thing. The second thing that it does is it's able to automate actions or decisions or recommendations based on these patterns.
Okay. So yeah, I mean, we hear things like narrow intelligence or with general intelligence, artificial general intelligence. Sometimes we hear machine learning and deep learning. How do you think about those?
So there's a lot of confusing terms out there. Let me just
Yeah.
start with the first two,
Yeah.
right? Artificial general intelligence and narrow intelligence. This is a distinction that some practitioners like to use to differentiate between what people think of as Terminator and Matrix level AI. Oh my gosh, we have this software that's going to take over the world and that's going to start learning and teach itself new skills. This is what we call AGI, artificial general intelligence. It's this idea of this software is so good at learning to recognize patterns and adapt to them over time that it begins to learn new patterns.
Okay.
Good news is, or bad news, depending on your view on the topic, is we're nowhere near that. Most everything today is a form of artificial narrow intelligence, and that's the reality. AI is very specific. So it can achieve remarkable results at things like recognizing when a customer is frustrated based on the intonation of their voice or the language that they're using, or detecting images in a driving scene to be able to cue things up in semi-self-driving cars. Think Tesla, emphasis on the semi. But once you train a model or an AI to do one specific thing, it's not going to go around and learn how to do other things. In fact, AI today can be fooled by simple things like taking an image and rotating it sideways, and it no longer knows what it's looking at.
Really? So we're far away from some of the, yes. I mean, I think sometimes you see articles in the popular media about AI, and there's a picture of a Terminator-like character. So that's far off. Now,
Yes.
a couple other things that people sometimes get confused with is like deep learning or machine learning. Are there a difference between those two things?
So deep learning is nothing more than a specific type of machine learning. So machine learning is the process with which you train a model to recognize a certain pattern. It's become any more interchangeable with the word AI because most AIs require machine learning in order to recognize and learn and react to these patterns. Deep learning comes out of the field of neural networks. It's a reference to this idea of can we replicate how the brain functions? And I think it's a slight misnomer, it's a stretch. But the idea is you have many different neurons that you string together to recognize patterns in unique ways. And the deep learning aspect comes to the reference of having many layers of these combined together. Historically, we didn't have the computational power to put any more than one, two, maybe three, if you were in the big fancy labs. And today it's regular to have neural networks that have hundreds of layers. This is where you start seeing hundreds or thousands or even more. And this is the type of stuff that's powering technology like GPT-3, which you may have heard of. It's basically a model that can produce near human-like text given a general prompt.
Wow. When you say near human-like text, talk a little bit more about that.
So there's a lot of interesting articles out there about stretching the limits or the edge cases of these models that exist today. And GPT-3, it's important to understand, it's doing nothing more than trying to accomplish the task, predict the next most likely word based on everything you've seen so far.
This is when Google's trying to complete my sentence. Is that accurate?
Kind of, but different. Think of that on steroids. So imagine if
I don't want to, Cal.
imagine if, predict the next word, and in your mind, you had been exposed to all of the internet, all of the public internet. That's a lot of stuff. That's a lot of garbage too. But it's this idea of it's autocomplete that has been exposed to so much that it's actually able to produce things that seem like it's written by a human. So you can give it prompts like rewrite this article that I just wrote in a format suitable for a 6-year-old. And it takes that prompt and it reproduces something else. There's ways in which it breaks. There's ways in which it can be abused. So there's a lot of challenges there. But it's doing nothing more than predicting the next most logical word based on the context it's been given.
So I'm fascinated. We've had coffee and lunch, and had some initial conversations, Cal, and I'm fascinated by this topic of leadership, how we prepare people to better serve in these very challenging, complex situations of leadership. As an entrepreneur, as a founder, as a leader, you understand that better than anyone. And so I'm fascinated by that topic, but then I'm also fascinated by any conversation where we're talking about the future and the future of work and technology and how technology is shaping the future of work. I take that in my world to how can we leverage technology to better prepare people to be successful? And so one quick example, and we've talked a little bit about this, is a colleague and I co-founded a company where literally what we're trying to do is perform the analytics on someone speaking. So you've said a certain number of times today. So have I. You've used a certain number of hand gestures, eye contact with the eye of the camera that we're both looking into, and we can start gathering some data. We can start doing sentiment analysis on our conversation right now. And if I use words like fascinating and awesome and wonderful, well, that might shift the results. But I think what's important is that there's data in our conversation right now. And how can we use that data to help better prepare people, to build awareness in people so that they can become better communicators? That's one small little slice of how we could help leaders be more effective. Sure. And I think, and this is the experimental part of our conversation, because literally as we were talking about this conversation, we were thinking, wow, I don't know where this could go. What do you see? What are other potential opportunities? How could your work with AI accelerate the development of a leader, augment the development of a leader? Do you have any ideas of what that could look like?
I'm going to flip that question around and almost say, how can leaders be prepared to take advantage of AI? I think it starts there.
Okay.
Whenever we talk about the intersection of leadership and AI, one thing really stands out to me the most, and that's change management. One thing about AI that I think most people get wrong, including the practitioners, is we talk about automation. We associate AI equals automation, but we don't talk about how humans factor into that automation. Take something that we now consider fairly mundane, manufacturing. You walk into any manufacturing facility today, and you're not going to see humans doing all the things. You're going to see humans working with machines and assembly lines and feeding things in and inspecting things and doing quality assurance and control. But at this point, manufacturing has become human plus machine orchestration. AI is literally doing the same thing, but for business processes.
Okay.
So how do we start to prepare ourselves for what that looks like and how that changes the nature of the work? It doesn't remove humans from the equation. And so when we talk about leadership plus AI, something that I think that is worth exploring more is how can leaders prepare their teams? How can leaders understand when it's appropriate, where it can be used, where it might not work or might not yield the results, or where it might need additional human support?
So, Cal, last night I had Dr. Loretta Mester from the Cleveland Federal Reserve in class. And she was talking and sharing stories with how at her level, they were thinking about how to navigate the pandemic, how to ensure the financial health of the United States. And she was talking kind of consistently about decision making and consistently discussing these models that had any number of different factors. If we have a model where there's a vaccine in 5 months and 6 months, sure, a certain percentage of individuals who've actually been vaccinated. So is it that type of work that would then augment the decision making of the leader?
So if I understand what you're asking, right, you're saying, hey, how does AI factor into these specific models and decision points?
Yeah, but that's an example of kind of what you were saying, right? We're using the technology to help the human make the decision, right?
Yeah, and let me give you 3 examples. I like to break down AI into 3 types of things.
Sure.
So simply, we're doing something today. Humans are doing it today, and it's a bottleneck to scaling. So, for example, maybe today you're manually qualifying all of your sales leads, or you're manually reviewing patient notes as a clinician, or you're manually doing whatever task. And that task is so critical that a human has to do it today. And it's a barrier for you to scale your business or organization. The second bucket is, hey, it's things that we'd like to do more of, and we have the knowledge and the skill to do it. But because it's so resource intensive, we're not going to do it all the time. Think quality assurance. When you have a contact center, you don't have quality assurance agents reviewing every single call. They might have some heuristics, right? They look at the worst calls. They look at maybe some of the best rated calls. They randomly sample and say, we're going to look at 2 to 3%, and we're going to call it a day, and we're going to use that assessment to inform recommendations and strategy. And the only reason we don't look at 100% is it's not worth that investment. But if you could, you might be able to find some really interesting patterns. You might be able to identify opportunities to cross-sell or assuage the concerns of a specific customer that wasn't caught. Maybe they didn't submit a rating or whatnot. And so that's the second bucket of where AI can add value. Right?
Okay.
You take something humans are doing and know how to do and scale it.
Yep.
And then this last bucket is it's things that we can't even comprehend because the scale of the pattern is too large. So think fraud detection in credit cards. So there are millions of ways that you can commit interesting behaviors. And it's given all the transactions that we have on a daily basis across millions of consumers. It's near impossible to imagine all the possible edge cases. And so AI can be used to scale up and prioritize, hey, here are some things that are interesting that diverge from normal based on these thousands of factors. Hey, human, do you want to consider this? So there are these 3 different ways that AI can add value in terms of patterns it can recognize and recommendations it can bring back to a human. And so when we talk about the changing nature of work, how do we use these 3 different ways of creating value with AI and pair that with decision making, pair that with humans, design that with that in mind intentionally?
Yeah. So I like how you flipped this. You've said, okay, how is the leader, how is the individual using one of these 3 methodologies to augment and help them do their work better, right? What are other innovative or creative ways that we could think about artificial intelligence and leadership?
So one of the most fascinating developments in AI today is this field of generative AI, which up until now has really, I haven't seen a lot of practical use for it. And I'm a person that believes strongly AI needs to become boring for it to become useful. And boring AI is good AI.
Yes.
So that's okay. That being said, the moment for generative AI is here. And what generative AI is it refers to a group of emerging capabilities to create new content. So maybe you dream up an image, you dream up an article, the GPT-3, for example. In the past, this technology was the exclusive domains of R&D labs. And today, the APIs and tools to be able to build on top of these capabilities are starting to emerge. And people are doing some really fascinating things with it. Think Dungeons and Dragons, self-created games and worlds. Think illustrated images to pair with children's books. Marketing copy or content. Or maybe you want to try to design a new concept for a chair or a bench subject to some ergonomic constraints, right? The sky's the limit. There's a lot of really cool utility. And one of the most practical examples of this that I heard at a conference recently is imagine if you could describe an object. Hey, I'm looking for a desk that's white with some elements of glass in it. And this model dreams up something for you. Wow. And then you're on Wayfair and you use this image that's been dreamt up to say, find me things in inventory that look similar to this. Okay, now we start co-creating with AI. I've read articles to the effect of, good luck, Illustrator, AI has now taken your job. I don't know if that's true. I've seen examples of how many different iterations of images generated you might need from a model to get it right. What I think this does is that it allows us to inspire creativity driven by AI. And it allows expert illustrators, expert artists, expert creators to maybe very quickly generate a lot of concepts, key in on something that they think makes sense, or identify new ideas or explore new ideas they might not have come up with in different styles or techniques or tones or whatnot, and then move forward with the creative process. So that, I think, is a really interesting aspect. Like when you say, how does AI inspire us to think differently? How do we use it as a creative tool and not see it as something that's going to take away creativity, or rather not relinquish our creativity to the AI?
Well, you're making me think of, and I imagine you've seen this, there's a TED Talk, I think it was TEDx Portland, and I'm forgetting the name of the speaker. They were trying to redesign a car. It was, I don't know if it's a chassis or just redesign and make it more safe. And the AI, the individual worked with the AI to redesign a car so that it would be safer. And I think it might have been a stunt car, if I'm not mistaken. Would that be something that's kind of similar to what you're saying?
That falls under the category of generative AI, this idea of searching through a lot of different possibilities to identify new ways of configuring things subject to constraint.
Lighter wings, or even parts of airplanes that could be designed differently to reduce weight, or to reduce weight yet strengthen, et cetera, right?
Absolutely. And I mean, you still need the engineer involved, right?
Yeah.
But it changes the nature of that engineer's work a little bit. One of the most interesting examples of this, just to show you how AI discovered new ways of thinking, is the famous AlphaGo example. And this is now several years old, but the AlphaGo example is a model that was trained to play the game Go, which we thought was a relatively, well-explored problem. We had human experts. This was done with what's called reinforcement learning. So this idea of it blindly stumbles through a solution millions and millions of times, and then it plays against itself. And each time it makes a move that leads to a win, it tries to recall that move. And over time, millions and millions of times, right? Humans learn much faster than this. It eventually evolves strategies. And some of these strategies defied human convention.
Yes.
They were weird. They were not your standard plays, and yet they worked.
Yeah, and the system won.
And the system won, yes. It eventually beat the best human player in the world, and then years later, different versions of it beat itself at different benchmarks and records.
Oh my gosh. Well, what else kind of excites you about this space? I mean, again, I'm going to kind of go back to this convergence. I love the concept of, look, the technology can augment the human, and it can augment the human in one of these three buckets, and it can augment the human in different ways. We can get to a place of kind of generative AI where maybe the technology is helping us dream of new ways, right?
Yeah.
Are there other things that come to mind for you?
So I'm obsessed with making things practical. Right. And there's almost like a big gap between, like, we hear these stories in the media of, AlphaGo, GPT-3, content image generating AI. And then we have our day-to-day jobs when I look at spreadsheets, right? Yeah. We have these dashboards and KPIs, and we're still doing things. And it almost seems like there's this gap between this technology exists today, but I don't see it applying for me, right? Yeah. So the question is, how do we make it practical? How do we make it boring? How do we take these pre-existing building blocks and string them together in unique, useful ways? And that's a leadership challenge. That's a vision challenge.
Can you talk about where you've seen it happen?
Something that I think is cool is content summarization.
Okay.
This is something we're exploring now with a couple of our partners. Content summarization is useful because when you have thousands upon thousands of Zoom recordings across an organization, we have no shortage of these we've generated over the past few years, or archived documents, right? You name it. The effort to manually review, categorize, tag, synthesize key highlights, right? That takes a lot of lift. When you talk about the contact center, many organizations today are still using net promoter score surveys, right? After you finish a transaction, they send out a survey, scale from 1 to 10, how likely are you to recommend us? We all know that only the happiest of the happy respond and the saddest and angriest and most bitter of the bitter respond. And it has some interesting artifacts, right? The nature of the responses you get. If you have only 10,000 calls a year, and that's a very small contact center, and each call is 3 to 5 minutes, that's 10,000 hours of your customers, or that's thousands of hours of your customers telling you exactly what they want. So this idea of can we transcribe it? Yes, we have the technology to do it. That's still a lot of information. Can we look for keywords? Okay, fine. But what if we could synthesize and summarize, like summaries, as if you had a person read it and type up a response? That's a practical example of this generative technology being applied to a large scale of data to produce interesting, meaningful reports. And now what do you do with it? Maybe you break it down by division, by department, by type of customer, right? There's a lot of different clever and creative ways you can use this general purpose technology to extract some useful things. And then you start to imagine workflow.
Yeah.
What decisions would you like to make, right? Is the decision reach out to a customer? Is the decision alert an account executive to proactively contact? Is it a attrition score? Is it a problem spotting score? Hey, what are our top 10 things, right? There's a lot of different decision points. So now that's an example of, hey, we have this general purpose technology. We have the media or data. We have some decision points that we'd like to influence, and we know who we're trying to influence directly, right? It's direct to consumer, it's direct to a business user that's going to reach out to that consumer. Maybe it's direct to an executive or a reporting team. And we now start to reimagine what this looks like. And this is exactly what our work with our clients look like. Tools and building blocks exist. It's just a matter of stringing them together in unique ways for your organization.
What I'm gathering from the conversation right now is just this need for leaders today to have the expertise around, in some ways, and let me know if I'm using the incorrect phrasing here, Cal, but you got to have some awareness of the data science and an understanding of even what are the questions I need to know to be dangerous so that I know that I'm looking at good stuff, and how can these technologies augment our work, accelerate our work, transform our work in instances so that we can be competitive, right? Is that a halfway decent summary?
No, that's perfect. I have two pleas.
Yeah.
The first is this. AI literacy. Know this word.
Yes. Yes.
And I will break this down. The first version of this was the digital literacy of the 2000s.
Yeah.
You have to learn word processing, Excel processing, and whatnot to become competitive in the workplace. And the people that learned these skills, they excelled, they succeeded. People who didn't learn these skills quickly became irrelevant and relegated to other types of work. The next wave of this was data literacy. We saw this in the 2010s. In the earlier part, if you didn't know what a dashboard was, that was fine. Today, you can't survive working in corporate America without knowing what Power BI is, or a business intelligence or a report is, and how to produce them, how to interpret them. Great. The next wave of this, AI literacy. What is a model? How is it fallible? Where is it useful? These are the types of general purpose skills that over the next 10 years are going to be critical to workforce. So AI literacy is what you described. Every executive needs to become AI literate and cultivate that skill within their organization. My second plea is take AI off the pedestal.
Nice.
Take AI off the pedestal. It's amazing. And I facilitated a lot of workshops at various different levels. When we make AI less scary, when we make it just another tool, it's not going to take your lunch. It's not going to learn patterns. It's not going to magic away all of your problems either, right? It's just a tool.
Yeah.
Treat it as a tool. And we now know the assumptions that break it, that help it. Then it unlocks the creative process on how do we use it? How do we create value from it? So two things, AI literacy, and then take it off the pedestal.
Wow. Well, okay. I want to switch gears just a little bit. And,
Sure.
you know, you're a leader. You are an individual who is an entrepreneur. You're building an organization. What are you learning about self in recent years? What are some reflections on you as a leader? Maybe what are you kind of learning as your strengths? And what are a couple areas that gosh, I need to improve in this, and I'm constantly practicing this part of the work? Because as an entrepreneur, as a business owner, you have to be ambidextrous. You have to be really, really just a jack of all trades. So what are you experiencing, sir?
Especially in the last few years.
Yes,
It's been
right?
a really hard time to be a leader, I think, in any organization. Lead with vulnerability, I think, is a lesson that I keep learning in different forms over and over again. And I don't know whether this was my own personal experience or if this is truly a part of the culture of corporate America. There's this notion that as an entrepreneur, you need to be a superhuman. You need to have all the answers. You need to be a go-getter. You need to have thick skin and whatnot. And so there's a reluctance amongst entrepreneurs, especially early stage entrepreneurs, to demonstrate vulnerability. It's something I've learned, especially in light of the pandemic and all the change that we've experienced, is it's never hurt me to lead with phrases like, I'm a little overwhelmed right now. I don't know if I have the capacity to do that. And I found that the more vulnerable I am with my team, with my clients, even when I'm presenting, the better the response that I get. And that's something I've really leaned into over the past couple of years.
Okay. Lead with vulnerability.
Lead with
Anything
vulnerability. Else? Where I need to get better at is the world of facilitating difficult conversations with empathy. How do we make it okay to have a difficult conversation?
Yep. Say more about that real quick.
I mean, the reality is we have results, right? Our businesses have results.
Yep.
You have profit margins. Profit margins pay the payroll. It has to come from somewhere. You don't hit all of your shots, but we also can't feed ourselves with gold stars.
Yes.
So this idea we have to have some difficult conversations.
I have not heard that before. So did you just make that up? We cannot feed ourselves with gold stars?
I think I've come across that or something like it.
Okay. Oh, wow. That's awesome. Okay, cool.
So there's a need to have difficult conversations, especially when you're under pressure. How do you make it okay to have a difficult conversation that preserves psychological safety for you, for the other person, right? There's this delicate act. Either I'm absorbing the failure or they're overburdening themselves and not focusing on progress and growth. And so I think that this is a really important area of leadership, one that I have found the hardest to master, but it's a worthwhile pursuit.
I see that over and over and over again in just my work with organizations, Cal, consistently. How do we have the tough conversations? What's that balance between, look, we need you to be productive, and we are also empathetic with your situation? What's that line, right? And you have one extreme. I think Elon said the other day, come back for all 5 days a week, or you're gone, right? You've got that end of the spectrum, and then you've got the other end of the spectrum where, we're so empathetic that we aren't getting the results, right? And that balance is a tricky one. That's for sure.
And how do you know that balance for each individual, right? What's the balance?
It's a different place for every person, right?
You hear a lot of, just through the grapevine, right? I have challenges with my people. I have challenges with my team. Everybody has challenges with their team. If you listen to all of the times that's said, you'd be convinced that the majority of the workforce isn't doing the right thing.
Yes.
And I'm just convinced that that's not the case. I'm convinced that most people are probably mismatched with the role, with the organization. And then we need to start normalizing a little bit more this idea of it's okay if you're not the right fit here. Let's help you succeed elsewhere, and that's okay too.
Yep. Well, and also, Cal, I'm going to flip this on you now.
Yeah.
What's also interesting about that statement is, sometimes it's the limitations of the leader.
That too.
It's easy
I
for
can't
the
help
leader.
you.
Yeah, it's easy for the leader at time to say, "Oh, this workforce doesn't get it." Well, you also have data that what you're putting out isn't yielding the results we want, right? So what does that say? And it's just a fascinating conversation because it's easy for followers to kind of blame leaders, and it's also easy for leaders to blame followers. But I think, to your point, it's through that conversation, through that dialogue, that we at least come to more of a shared understanding of the expectations and the needs. And at times the leader's unprepared for that, and at times the followers are unprepared for that. It's just it's complex, and so that's yeah.
That's a perfect example of where AI really can't help anytime soon.
That's not going away.
Yeah, if you want a high-paying job, master that. It's guaranteed.
Well, Cal, I have loved our conversation. I have great respect for a few different things. Great respect for just the work that you're doing and the frontiers that you're exploring from just a work standpoint. But then I also have great respect for the fact that you are building an organization and that you are an entrepreneur and that you are creating and developing and growing. And that's also a challenging work. I also love that self-awareness around leading with vulnerability and being open to the fact that I don't know it all, and that's a very, very important thing, because I think a number of leaders in corporate America feel like they should know everything, put that pressure on themselves to know everything, and in the process hide a lot and then hurt a lot. And so I think that leading with vulnerability is just such wise advice, because it's important, because you're human and you're not superhuman, at least until the AGI augments us with the neural link, I guess. Is that when we kind of go to the next level as a species? I don't know.
The next couple hundred years.
Take it off the pedestal. I love it. I love it.
Take it off the pedestal.
Okay, sir. Thank you so much for being with us. We really, really appreciate it. Have a great day, and thanks for the work you do.
Scott, thanks for the invitation, and thank you everyone for listening.
Okay, be well. Take it off the pedestal. I really love Cal's clarity around what's actually happening with this technology called artificial intelligence. I feel a little bit better. I feel a little bit more comfortable, at least with where we are. But I also have a really clear understanding of the necessity for leaders today who are, in some cases, designing strategy, setting paths forward for their organization. How are they going to leverage some of these technologies enabling disruption to do that work? And do they have the literacy? He called it AI literacy. I would call it digital literacy. Similar concept. Do you have an awareness? Do you have an awareness of how these technologies are being used? Do you have an awareness of how they're being leveraged, how they are providing differentiation and a strategic advantage for the organization or functions in your industry? I think that's going to be a continuing conversation, and leaders who don't have an understanding may find themselves left behind. So, Cal, thank you for the work that you do. Thank you for helping demystify some of this spookiness known as artificial intelligence. And everyone, have a great day. Hope you enjoyed this topic. A little bit of a different take, but a fun take. Love it. Have a great day, everyone. As always, thanks for checking in. You have just finished another episode of Practical Wisdom for Leaders with Scott Allen. To contact me, visit scottjallen.net or send me a note at scott@scottjallen.net. I'm also on LinkedIn, so let's connect. If you have feedback, I'd love to hear it. And as always, thank you so much for listening. And now here's my daughter, Emily, with the outro.
You've been listening to Phronesis, Practical Wisdom with Scott Allen.